When people ask me to talk about my DukeEngage experience, I never know where to start. For me, it was a really transformative experience, and it's something that I could talk about for hours, but I've come to find out very quickly that when people ask, they just kind of want a 1 to 2 sentence summary. But my experience is not something that I can summarize in 1 to 2 sentences. On the surface, the job that I did sounds really simple. I was just reading people's letters. I would type into an Excel database any salient facts about their story. If there was anything we could help them with, I would write it down, and then I would take a couple minutes to craft a response. So that seems really simple, right? It was actually a lot more complicated than that. The letters that I was reading were from LGBTQ migrants in detention centers. So what a detention center is, it's basically a prison, especially for undocumented migrants. So these people not only are undocumented, but they're also part of the LGBTQ community. So they have a lot of identities which are being persecuted. So usually the letters that came were filled with incredibly heartbreaking stories, and they took a long time to process. And I wanted to make sure that I gave each letter its time. A lot of people would either write asking for legal support so that we could refer them for a lawyer so that they could fight an asylum case, or they would ask for bond money so that they could fight for the asylum case outside of the detention center, just because it was incredibly traumatizing to be held under those conditions, especially coming after fleeing another terrifying situation. But mostly people would write asking for emotional support, and that was something that I didn't know I was qualified to give, just because I had never been in a situation like that. I wanted to make sure that I gave each letter its time, but that was hard when there were so many letters to respond to. So I had to find the right balance between getting through enough letters, but also giving each letter its time. I remember one particular letter, which was about a guy from El Salvador who was 19 years old. I was 19 years old at the time. He and I had the same taste in music. We had the same taste in TV shows. We had some of the same favorite foods. And I could see a lot of myself in him, but our stories were also really different. He had a daughter back home. He had a family who had saved up for 3 years to make sure that he could get to the United States. He had been traveling through Mexico for about 2 years before finally making it to the US-Mexico border, where he was detained after an hour of walking through. So I actually got to meet with this guy in person, and he told me more of his story in depth. And all I could do was sit there and listen, because there wasn't anything I could say to him. I think our natural response as human beings is to tell someone after they tell us something traumatizing that everything is going to be okay, that everything will be fine and everything's going to work out. But I knew, statistically speaking, a male that was young and was healthy was very likely to get deported and sent back home, even though he was being persecuted. He was being threatened to either join a gang or be killed. So his life was put in danger. He had no choice but to come here. But I knew that he was going to get sent back. And so I couldn't tell him that everything was going to work out. All I could do was sit there and nod my head and maybe try to ask him about his favorite things to do, how he was keeping busy inside of the detention center, just to kind of get his mind off of his asylum case. So I felt really useless at that moment. But I corresponded with him a couple weeks after visiting him, and he thanked me for having listened to him and for having taken his mind off of things, and just for having an hour where he didn't have to think about what was going to happen. He said that even though the detention center was full of people, it wasn't full of people that he could talk to. So listening, I came out of that thinking that listening was a really valuable skill and something I really wanted to think about doing more, because I think sometimes we think about listening only in conjunction with giving advice later. And sometimes people don't want advice, or sometimes you don't have the right advice to give. So all you can do is listen. Listen is a really valuable skill. and it's something I'm glad I learned.